gentlemen, I'm going to rank 32 Tom Ford private blend fragrances with immense improvement rating, starting from lowest to highest based on my own opinion, in order for me to give you a Tom Ford private blend fragrance buying guide. Let's not waste any more time and let's begin, and get yourself something to drink and possibly a snack, because this video is going to be fairly long. The very first fragrance and the lowest men's improvement rated Tom Ford fragrance is Neroli Portofino. Neroli Portofino is this very comfortable, bright, white floral fragrance with some citrusy touches and some aromatic nature to it as well, that in the end becomes a soapy, mild fragrance. In my opinion, Neroli Portofino is a great, bright, fresh, citrusy fragrance with some white floral and aromatic touches, but for the price that Tom Ford wants for this fragrance is, in my opinion, subpar and below average, therefore getting the lowest men's improvement rating. On my skin, it lasts 3 to 5 hours with a very mild skin scent and no projection at all. It's a great fragrance, don't get me wrong, it's very pleasant and easy to wear, but for me it's not really worth it. But if the price doesn't really matter for you and you don't really care about the longevity and projection, then why not? But I simply think there are better alternatives out there. Moving on up to a 6.9 out of 10, I have Neroli Portofino's flanker, which is Fleur de Portofino. Fleur de Portofino is, in my opinion, slightly more interesting and unique because it focuses more on some white florals and dries off to being slightly sweeter and more bitter than Neroli Portofino. On my skin, I also get better longevity with 6 to 8 hours of performance, and this fragrance is also going to be a mild skin scent, but for some this is going to have a great sillage trail, which I think is super interesting. And overall, I think this is just a slightly better fragrance than Neroli Portofino. So if you want an interesting, fresh, slightly sweet white floral fragrance that is very easy to wear in the summer, I think Fleur de Portofino is going to be a great one for you to check out. It's still very expensive, but just a little bit better than the original in my opinion. Moving on to fragrances with a 7 out of 10 men's improvement rating, I have these two right here. I have Jasmin, Rouge and Mandarino di Amalfi. Mandarino di Amalfi is this very bright, zingy, citrusy, sweet fragrance with a green tinge to it coming from a mint and basil accord, giving it a slightly green aromatic tinge, but it's very minute and not very noticeable, especially on my skin. But this is mostly going to be a fresh, clean citrus bomb, mainly coming from mandarin and orange, giving the citrusy nuances a sweetness to it as well. And whenever this gets to dry, it becomes a very mild, clean, slightly oceanic, that might be due to the aromatic nature, scent that is very pleasant, easy to wear and happy scent as well. On my skin, this lasts 4 to 6 hours with very mild projection, and that quickly becomes a mild skin scent. I think it's such a pleasant fragrance that it deserves a 7 out of 10. Meanwhile, Jasmin Rouge is a very jasmine heavy fragrance, as the name suggests, with the white florals giving it this very dense, almost creamy feeling to it, and whenever this gets to dry, it becomes slightly spicy and sweet while still withholding a white floral nature. On my skin, Jasmin Rouge lasts 7 to 9 hours with a mild projection that quickly becomes a mild skin scent as well. I think this is a very interesting white floral fragrance that mainly focuses on jasmine, giving it this very dense white floral feeling that unfortunately on my skin isn't very strong. But if you're looking for a great jasmine fragrance, I think Jasmin Rouge is definitely a great contender for that, hence why I have given this a 7 out of 10 as well with Mandarino di Amalfi. Jumping to a 7.4 out of 10 men's improvement rating, I have Oud Soleil Blanc. My review of Oud Soleil Blanc is one of my most viewed videos here on the channel. There's a reason for it. This is such a great, mass appealing, cheap private blend Tom Ford fragrance, and that is because this smells very sunscreen-like with a noticeable slightly green pistachio top note that in the end becomes this very smooth, creamy, fresh sunscreen fragrance. This is such a pleasant summer fragrance to wear, and since this is an eau de toilette flanker to the original Soleil Blanc, this is going to be significantly cheaper than other private blend fragrances. On my skin, this lasts 6 to 8 hours with mild projection, quickly drying to being a skin scent. If you're looking to try a fresh sunscreen-like fragrance, why not try with this one right here? And moving on from Eau de Soleil Blanc to to Soleil Blanc because that has a 7.5 out of 10 minutes improvement rating. Soleil Blanc is also going to be the sunscreen fresh fragrance, but being slightly stronger than this one right here. I think Soleil Blanc is slightly better because it is just a little bit stronger and longer lasting. And speaking of longer lasting, Soleil Blanc lasts 8 to 10 hours on my skin with a slightly better projection than the Eau de Toilette flanker that quickly becomes a mild skin scent as well. If you go for Eau de Soleil Blanc or Soleil Blanc, I still think both of these fragrances are great summer fragrances that smell of a very creamy, pleasant sunscreen, and you can't go wrong with both of them. It really depends on the price point that you're willing to pay and the concentration that you prefer. Moving up the ranks to 7.9 out of 10 minutes improvement ratings, I have these two fragrances right here, Rouge de Russie and Electric Cherry. Electric Cherry is one of the flankers from the Lost Cherry subline from the Private Blend collection, and this is going to be the easiest to wear out of all of them. It's going to be the most wearable one and the most likable perhaps, but there's a caveat. This is by far the weakest one. On my skin, this only lasts between 4 to 5 hours with a very mild projection that quickly becomes a skin scent. This is going to be a much fresher interpretation of the Lost Cherry DNA, reason being of the added ginger accord at the top combined with the cherry that gives this somewhat of a fresh, zingy type of top. And whenever this fragrance gets to develop and dry, there's a pink pepper accord in the base and Jasmin sambac that gives this fragrance a white floral cherry freshness that is very unique while still being mass appealing, easy to wear and very versatile. But I need to stress how weak and disappointing this fragrance is going to be for a lot of people out there. Moving over to Rouge de Russie though is going to be much different. Rouge de Russie is going to be this very spicy, leathery rose fragrance, which is super interesting and unique and something that I haven't expected from this fragrance. This is very peppery, dry, leathery, but still has some floral aspects coming from the rose. Rouge de Russie is very divisive as well and can be slightly challenging and not for everyone, but if you're looking for a spicy rose fragrance, then this is definitely something I think you should try. On my skin, this lasts 7 to 9 hours with a very mild projection that quickly becomes a skin scent as well. This fragrance though is discontinued, but if you can get your hands on it or at least try it somewhere, then I think this is definitely one that you should try because of its unique qualities in a rose fragrance. Moving up to an 8 out of 10 minutes improvement rating, I have Tom Ford Soleil De Feu. Soleil De Feu is going to be in the realm of Soleil Blanc, being this very creamy sunscreen like fragrance, but there's an interesting light gourmand twist to it because even though this smells very suntan lotion like, there's some sandalwood to add some more creaminess to it, and there is also a spicy element here that resembles the scent of some freshly baked spiced cookies. That is super interesting. So even though this is going to remind you of other fragrances from the Soleil collection from the Private Blend, there is also something distinctively different that is super cozy, comfortable and very pleasant. On my skin, Soleil De Feu lasts 8 to 10 hours with a mild projection that also quickly becomes a skin scent. This is one of the coziest Tom Ford fragrances I have ever tried and definitely the most unique one from the Soleil collection from the Private Blend for sure. Moving up to an 8.2 out of 10 minutes improvement rating, I have the discontinued Tom Ford Lavender Extreme. Lavender Extreme is one of, if not my most favorite lavender focused fragrance, especially because this has an interesting take on lavender. This starts off with being fresh, aromatic, airy and just a little green at the top, but whenever this fragrance gets to develop and dry, it becomes more fresh, spicy while withholding the lavender floral touches and becoming this sweet scent in the base while still having fresh, spicy qualities and that lavender still hanging in there. I think this is a very interesting take on a lavender fragrance because this is so complex with so many different nuances, and still I think this is a very unisex fragrance that both genders can wear. And if you can get your hands or nose on it, I definitely recommend you check this out. On my skin, this lasts 10 to 12 hours, so it's very long lasting as well, with a very mild projection that becomes a skin scent after an hour or so. This is a very good lavender fragrance, and certainly one that I think you definitely should check out, especially if you're looking for a very high quality lavender fragrance. But it's going to be expensive and hard to find because it is discontinued, but I definitely think this is worth trying if you can. Moving on just a little bit higher with an 8.3 out of 10 men's improvement ratings, I have Tom Ford Fabulous and the 2022 version of Tom Ford Bois Marocain. Tom Ford Fabulous is going to be a very interesting leather fragrance because this is a leather fragrance with a touch of bitter almond, giving it an airy, nutty quality while also being slightly green and aromatic. This is undoubtedly, in my opinion, more masculine leaning, but it can still be very unisex, especially if you're looking for a very unique take on a leather fragrance. This is, in my opinion, one of the most slept on, underrated Tom Ford fragrances. It is expensive, don't get me wrong, and it's not really for everyone, but if you're looking for a leather fragrance that is very unorthodox and not like any other, I definitely think you should check this out for sure. On my skin, Fabulous lasts 8 to 10 hours with 1 to 2 meters of projection for about an hour or so, which then dries to being a mild skin scent. Definitely one I think all of you should check out, especially if you like leather fragrances. And moving on to Tom Ford Bois Marocain's 2022 re-released version. This is going to be a very dry, spicy, very woody fragrance. If you want something very cedar wood heavy with a touch of some pink pepper and some other spice nuances, and this is definitely something just for you. This will be very divisive, undoubtedly masculine leaning, and very dry and woody. On my skin, this lasts about 7 to 8 hours with an arm's length of projection in the first hour or so, which then dries to being a skin scent. And if you want something dark, deep, and very wood heavy with spicy nuances, then this is definitely something for you. Very divisive, but still a very good fragrance nonetheless. Moving onwards to 8.6 out of 10 men's improvement rating, that is the timeless classic masterpiece Tom Ford Oud Wood. Oud Wood is this westernized take on an oud fragrance because this is not going to be challenging or funky at all, but this is going to be very smooth, mass appealing, easy to wear, spicy, airy oud fragrance that is very office friendly and possibly a signature scent worthy fragrance as well. On my skin, this lasts 6 to 8 hours with a good projection in the first 30 minutes, which then dries off to being a mild but still noticeable here and there skin scent. This is undeniably a sexy, timeless masterpiece of a fragrance because this has one of the best westernized oud accords out there, but in terms of this being worth it due to reformulations and different takes on this DNA from other brands, this is not as worth it as it could have been many years ago. But if you don't care about longevity, projection, and the price, and you want the original thing, then definitely go for Oud Wood. I love this scent DNA, hence the high rating, but there are better fragrances from this oud line for sure, which I'm going to get to. Moving slightly higher with an 8.7 out of 10 men's improvement rating, I have Tom Ford Bitter Peach. Bitter Peach is this very fun, interesting, playful, fruity fragrance that focuses on peach at the top with this very sweet, dense, thick peachiness that dries to being lactonic and milky in a very pleasant and fun way. I think this is very unisex but slightly feminine leaning, but I still think this is very pleasant, easy to wear for me, and anyone can wear this fragrance if they so desire. This lasts 10 to 12 hours on my skin with very noticeable projection for a good amount of hours, which then dries to being a mild skin scent. I love to wear wear this all year round, especially when I'm feeling to wear something that is peach oriented. So if you want something playful, fun, that is sweet and fruity, then bitter peach is almost as good as they come. Moving even higher to 8.9 out of 10 men's improvement rated fragrances, I have Tom Ford Cherry Smoke and the discontinued and rare Tom Ford London. This is another flanker of the Lost Cherry DNA, but this is made much more darker, slightly more nuanced, with an interesting olive accord in the development, in the dry down, and a very noticeable smoke accord that brings some dark, dense nuances to the already very dense and sweet cherry accord at top that is very noticeable throughout the lifetime of the fragrance. This is my most favorite cherry fragrance from the Tom Ford line. The reason being is that this leans the most masculine out of all three from the cherry line, and that this is just a tiny bit more complex than the original Lost Cherry. I just think if you're looking for the most masculine leaning take on the Lost Cherry DNA, then Cherry Smoke is definitely something for you. On my skin, this lasts 8 to 10 hours with an arm's length of projection for an hour or so, which then dries to being a noticeable but mild skin scent. This is the most masculine leaning take on the Lost Cherry DNA and my favorite from the cherry line of fragrances from the private blend. Let's move over to this discontinued fragrance right here, Tom Ford London. This is a very challenging fragrance, and I understand why this got discontinued, because this is very animalic, dirty, dry, and some people might find this uncomfortable because this can smell a little animalic and pissy because of the cumin accord at the top that is known to give fragrances a fecal, dirty, and somewhat animalic tinge to a fragrance, and this definitely has that, and it's also a very strong fragrance for sure. This is also spicy, woody, and whenever this gets to dry, you pick up on this very well made dry woody oud accord with some resinous balsamic touches as well, coming from labdanum and some other resonoids, which I think is super interesting, undoubtedly masculine, but so challenging at the same time. On my skin, I get 12 plus hours of longevity with an arm's length of projection for around an hour or so, which then dries to being a skin scent. Very challenging, difficult to wear fragrance, but undoubtedly masculine, head turning, and a stunning fragrance nonetheless. Finally, moving up to fragrances with a men's improvement rating of 9 out of 10 are going to be Tom Ford Oud Wood Parfum and Tom Ford Lost Cherry. This is going to be a very sweet, cherry heavy, fruity fragrance with creamy, dense, and thick qualities, and whenever this gets to dry, it becomes very jammy, creamy, and slightly balsamic, while still withholding the cherry sweetness throughout the lifetime of the fragrance, which I think is super addictive and mass appealing. Super dense, thick cherry fragrance. This lasts 10 to 12 hours on my skin with an arm's length of projection for an hour or so, which then dries to a noticeable but mild skin scent. This is, in my opinion, objectively the best fragrance from the cherry subline from the private blend, because it's going to be the most mass appealing, most versatile for both genders to wear, and in my experience it's also the most compliment getting one from the line. And the second fragrance that has a 9 out of 10 men's improvement rating is Tom Ford Oud Wood Parfum. This is the Oud Wood DNA, more dense, stronger, thicker, more robust, and amped up in concentration. Not only does it last longer on my skin, between 10 to 12 hours, but it also projects around an arm's length or so, which then quickly dries to being a mild skin scent. I think Tom Ford Oud Wood Parfum is the superior fragrance to wear nowadays. It might be more expensive than the Eau de Parfum version of Tom Ford Oud Wood, but I think it's more worth it nowadays because of the amped up density and strength of Tom Ford Oud Wood Parfum. The perfect wearing experience would be to wear the parfum first and then apply apply the Eau de Parfum on top to get the best of both worlds from both of the fragrances. But nonetheless, Tom Ford Oud Wood Parfum, in my opinion, deserves a 9 out of 10 minutes improvement rating, as well as Lost Cherry. Moving onwards to even higher territory of 9.4 out of 10 minutes improvement rating, I have Tom Ford Fougère d'Argent. Fougère d'Argent is, in my opinion, one of the best Fougère fragrances out there because it is undoubtedly masculine, very easy to wear, and resembles the scent of a shaving foam while still being moderately strong and signature scent worthy. This makes me feel masculine. This smells super masculine leaning, and I can't stress enough how good of a signature scent this is. This is woody, balsamic, has a lavender touch to it that in the end, combining all of these sensations, gives you this shaving foam barbershop like scent profile, which I think is super timeless and amazing to wear. On my skin, I get 8 to 10 hours of longevity with moderate projection that after an hour or so dries off to being a mild skin scent. If you're looking for an old school, timeless masculine fragrance from the private blend from Tom Ford, I definitely think Fougère d'Argent is the best contender in that category. Moving up to even higher ratings, I have 2017 version of Tom Ford Vanille Fatale. Vanille Fatale is this very sexy, dark, spicy, deep vanilla fragrance with a boozy touch to it whenever it gets to dry, but at the top it has this slightly spicy sweetness to it, and whenever this gets to dry it becomes slightly denser, thicker, darker, with some boozy touches, and the vanilla in the base cranks up the scent profile to being this very sweet and boozy scent that is timeless, super delicious, and very sexy, mass appealing. On my skin, I get 8 to 10 hours of longevity with an arm's length of projection that dries into being a mild skin scent after an hour or so. If you can get your hands on this old batch of Vanille Fatale, I definitely think it is worth it because it is better, in my opinion, than the new 2024 re-release of Vanille Fatale, which I unfortunately haven't tested longevity wise, which is why it's not here on the list. It is one of the best vanilla fragrances I have ever put my nose on, hence of the high rating, and it's also a very complex vanilla scent. Moving even higher, 9.6 out of 10 minutes improvement ratings, I have these two right here, Tom Ford Vanilla Sex and the discontinued Tom Ford Vert d'Encens. Vanilla Sex is this very well executed, mass appealing, very sweet vanilla fragrance with a vanilla tincture, vanilla absolute, and a vanilla accord, which gives this an overdose of vanilla that whenever you're wearing it, this gives off a very fluffy, Play-Doh like nougat marzipan type of sensation that I think is delicious, very sweet, and very mass appealing. I love this fragrance even though it is a very simple vanilla fragrance, especially for this very high price tag for a 50 ml bottle. I still think it is one of the best vanilla fragrances I have ever put my nose on because it is executed very well and with a very high quality. On my skin, I get 15 plus hours of longevity from this fragrance with an arm's length of projection for around an hour or two, which then dries to being a noticeable but mild skin scent. I think if you're looking for a simple, mass appealing, very strong vanilla fragrance and you don't really care about the price and want something that is really out there and pushes hours on end, then Vanilla Sex from Tom Ford is definitely one that I can highly recommend. And moving on to Tom Ford Vert d'Encens. Vert d'Encens is going to be this very dark, smoky, incense heavy, woodsy green fragrance. This is very dark, very masculine, and challenging for some people because this is very dense, deep, very complex, and in the end gives you this very strong concoction of a very green, dark, smoky, woodsy fragrance. On my skin, I get 10 to 12 hours of longevity with 1 to 2 meters of projection for around an hour or two, which then dries to being a very noticeable skin scent that you can pick up here and there. If you want something that is very masculine and dark with green woodsy nuances and qualities, then I definitely think you should try to get your nose on this, because it is very hard to find, very expensive, reason being it's discontinued. But if you want these qualities in a fragrance, then I think Vert is one of the very best ones. Moving up to the very top with a 9.7 out of 10 men's improvement rating, I have a discontinued fragrance that I've compared to the original that is still around, and that is Tom Ford Tuscan Leather Intense. Tuscan Leather Intense is going to be like the original Tuscan Leather, but denser, thicker, darker, more intense and more complex, but not as lively and not as much projecting as the original. And there's an issue with this fragrance. On my skin, as I mentioned in my comparison of the two, I get an energy drink stickiness to it that reminds people and myself of a Red Bull, which can be very off-putting and weird for some, and I definitely understand that. But nonetheless, this is a very strong leather fragrance that is very dark, dirty, dry, and simply put, a very challenging leather fragrance. On my skin, I get 12 plus hours of longevity with an arm's length of projection that at some point it dries off to being a mild skin scent. I simply think that the original Tuscan leather is slightly better, hence why I'm going to talk about that one next. The reason I'm going to talk about the original Tuscan leather and the private blend version of Tom Ford Oud Minérale is because they both have a 9.8 out of 10 men's improvement rating. The original Tuscan leather has this dry, earthy leather feel to it with a very mild and minute raspberry fruitiness at the top that is also giving you this very earthy, dry feeling to the very dry, slightly dirty leather scent. This is a classic, very masculine, opulent fragrance that is, in my opinion, a masterpiece and one of the best dirty leather fragrances. On my skin, I get 10 to 12 hours of longevity from Tuscan leather, and because this is slightly more lively, easier to wear, and doesn't have that weird Red Bull thing going on in the top, I think this is just a little bit better than the intense version, and it's slightly easier to wear, hence why I prefer this over the intense version. Moving on from Tuscan leather, I want to talk about the private blend version of Tom Ford Oud Minérale. Oud Minérale is going to be this very dark, oceanic, aquatic fragrance with some green algae-like nuance to it and a very dry, woody oud accord. And combined, this is going to give you a fragrance that reminds me a lot of Porto Parisi Megamare, because this is a very aquatic, mineralic, slightly salty green fragrance that is very challenging, but in my opinion, an awesome, unique fragrance to wear in the spring and summer if you want something of that nature. On my skin, the last 12 plus hours, 1 to 2 meters of projection that dries off to being a mild skin scent after an hour or so. This is very strong and very challenging, but in my opinion, it's an awesome, unique fragrance, especially if you want to stand out in a very potent way with an aquatic oud fragrance. It's super unique, super interesting, and if you can't get your hands on this one, then you can try the signature version, which is almost as good, but the private blend version is just a little bit stronger, denser, and more nuanced. We are nearing us the very top of the list with men's improvement rated fragrances of a 9.9 out of 10, and both of these are unfortunately discontinued, and I'm talking about Tom Ford Oud Fleur and Tom Ford Oud Wood Intense. Tom Ford Oud Wood Intense is not very similar to the original Oud Wood in the sense that the only thing that they share is, if you really dig deep, they use somewhat of the same oud accord that is westernized, but the rest of the fragrance is far from that. This is going to be very green, much stronger, and also have animalic touches in there because of the castoreum that is used, and the cypress gives this fragrance a very green feeling to it. This is significantly stronger. Green, woodsy, animalic take on the oud wood DNA, which I think is super well made, but not as mass appealing as the original Oud Wood DNA. On my skin, I get 10 to 12 hours of longevity with 1 to 2 meters of projection for around an hour or so, which then becomes a very noticeable scent, and in the end it becomes a mild skin scent at some point. If you want a challenging version of the Oud Wood DNA that is also a little animalic and green, then I think you should definitely check this out. If you can, I will have an affiliate link below where you can pick up a 10 ml like I have here. It's the only place in the EU that offers you a 10 ml of this fragrance for a great price. And moving from Oud Wood Intense to Tom Ford Oud Fleur. Tom Ford Oud Fleur is also this westernized oud, but with an overdose of an amazing rose scent. This is a very opulent, dense, jammy, rose heavy fragrance with the oud accord that is also shared in the original Oud Wood fragrance, but it's also stronger than Oud Wood and it's much more rose dominant, which I really enjoy because it brings the best of both worlds in this fragrance. It gives you a well-made, westernized, smooth oud accord and a very dense, opulent, sweet, jammy rose that is to die for in my opinion. And it also lasts significantly longer than Oud Wood, with Oud Fleur lasting 10 to 12 hours with moderate projection for around an hour or so, which then dries to being a noticeable to mild skin scent. I think it's one of the very best fragrances Tom Ford has ever put out, and I think it's such a shame that it's discontinued. And lastly, in my opinion, the best of the best, the cream of the crop of Tom Ford private blend fragrances, I have 4, and these are going to be Tom Ford Tobacco Oud, Tom Ford Tobacco Vanille, Tom Ford Tobacco Oud Intense, and lastly Tom Ford Plum Japonais. Plum Japonais is, in my opinion, the best plum fragrance ever created, because this is going to be sweet, opulent, decadent, delicious plum with oud and some other sweet nuances to it. This is very strong, deep, dense, super complex fragrance. It's, in my opinion, one of the very best fragrances Tom Ford has ever created, and unfortunately discontinued. I don't know why, and I think it's a shame. On my skin, this lasts 10 to 12 hours with an arm's length of projection for around an hour, which then dries off to being a mild skin scent. There's a reason I have given this a 10 out of 10, because it is one of the best fragrances I have ever tried, and one that I really want a full bottle of at some point in my life. I'm going to move on from Plum Japonais to another discontinued fragrance, and that is Tom Ford Tobacco Oud Intense. This is my most favorite fragrance of all time, combined with the original Tobacco Oud, and the reason being is that this is, in my opinion, masculinity in a bottle. This has one of the best oud accords I have ever tried, that is very dark, dry, woody, and super intense, with a pinch of animalic facets coming from castoreum and the tobacco, whiskey, dryness, booziness. Combining all of that, it gives you opulence, darkness, dominance, and this concoction of a strong tobacco and oud fragrance with some animalic touches. On my skin, I get 12 plus hours with 1 to 2 meters of projection for around 3 to 4 hours. This is insanely strong, and in my opinion, the best fragrance I have ever tried, and I really want a full bottle at some point, because if I could, this would be my signature scent all year round. Tobacco Oud is just like I described Tobacco Oud Intense, but without the animalic facets. This is also super strong, dark, smoky, dry, and woody, with whiskey, tobacco, and one of the best oud accords you will ever find in a fragrance, especially from a designer. This is top tier perfumery right here. Super masculine, dark, mysterious. I can talk about this fragrance for hours on end. It's my favorite fragrance I have ever picked a full bottle of, and on my skin I get 12 plus hours of longevity with an arm's length of projection for around an hour or 2, which then dries to a noticeable and in the end a mild skin scent. Also, talking about Tom Ford Tobacco Vanille, this is a very dark, deep, dense, super complex vanilla fragrance with tobacco that is also a main part of the fragrance, that gives you this very dry, almost Christmassy type of feeling that a lot of people get, with a very deep dense sweetness coming from the vanilla in the base. You have this very contrasting and interesting dried fruit accord that gives you this pungent scent combined with all of the other facets in this fragrance. This is also a masterpiece, hence why I have given this a 10 out of 10. It's one of the best tobacco fragrances I have ever tried, hence why it is on this list so high as all of the other 10 out of 10s up there. These were the 4 best Tom Ford fragrances I have for you. Gentlemen, what a video. This has been by far the longest video I've ever made, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I helped you, gentlemen, find your favorite Tom Ford private blend fragrances. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? And most importantly, what is your favorite Tom Ford private blend fragrance, or overall your favorite Tom Ford fragrance? Leave your comments down in the comment section below. I would love to see what you have to say down there and discuss your opinions down there. Also, if you enjoyed this longer than usual video, then don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to the Men's Improvement YouTube channel for more videos about fragrances, grooming, style, fashion, skincare, fitness, watches, everything that will make you, gentlemen, the best possible versions of yourselves. The last few things that I want to ask you, gentlemen, is to smile more because it's free, and I want you to watch these 2 videos right here. This one here below is going to be my latest upload, whereas this one up here is going to be video that the YouTube algorithm thinks you will enjoy.